very much. Thank you. Hello, I'm Ron Reagan. Are we alone? And before you say, isn't everyone, I'll explain. I'm talking about UFOs. So are a whole lot of other people these days. Interstellar travel may be lurking around the corner, and sooner or later, we'll have to decide, is something out there?
The search for intelligent life beyond Earth, or on Earth for that matter, is as old as mankind, but it has accelerated since World War II. A lot of sightings occur near Air Force bases, the assumption being that aliens are attracted to our technology and swing by for a closer look.
First of all, it looked as though it was an aircraft. The light was coming in, it appeared to be quite slow, and then it speeded up and it came towards the lodge. And the closer it got, the more I realized it was not an aircraft.
Sometimes there are pieces of something left behind. Usually there are stories and accounts.
We saw people, or whatever you want to call them, coming out. They didn't come out. There were no doors or anything on the ship. These things moved out. There were 3 of them. And they were covered with, they had light around them. And it, you know, they came out, they stood there, and they actually floated to make it more complicated. Beings, exactly.
And always there are skeptics and debunkers.
But if you didn't know it was a lighthouse, if you thought it was something small, maybe 2-3 meters across, pulsing about and pulsing white in the forest, yes, it looks as if it's within the trees, and it does appear to light up the trees as well.
Another consistent factor, things never get resolved with any finality.
When they've been telling the public for 30 years there's no such thing as UFOs, how can they reverse themselves now and say there is and they've been lying and covering it up?
At least not for us, the public, who depend on our governments to share the results of their investigations.
Welcome back. Our first guest, Stanton Friedman, a physicist who once worked on big government projects, thinks every administration since 1947 has covered up evidence of UFOs and lied about other data relating to UFOs and aliens. Philip Klass disagrees. He's a former editor of Aviation Week and Space Technology. He would have put a UFO on the magazine's cover if he'd ever found one. Thank you for coming. Appreciate your being here. Welcome to the show. Stan, quick yes or no, have they landed or at least flown over?
Oh yeah, they've landed, they've crash landed, they've come down, taken people away, they've produced physical traces all over the planet. They don't seem to discriminate.
What's the most compelling evidence?
I suppose it's the similarity of the reports from all over the world and of the physical traces and even the abductee reports and the apparent indication that governments are not telling us what goes on from all over the world, although interestingly, the Russians have opened up in the last 2 years. Just a couple of weeks ago, in mid-August, there was a big article, a full-page article almost, in one of the Russian publications talking about how Stalin had pushed his top rocket scientists to investigate in great secrecy. And they concluded it wasn't a threat to the security of the Soviet Union, but they were real. This just came out. Now, why they're talking now, I don't know. Maybe they need help. Maybe they're trying to encourage us to speak up.
KGB misinformation plot, perhaps. Roswell, New Mexico, 1947.
July
Seems to be a
1947.
seminal
Yes.
date and time.
It's less than 2 weeks after the real big noise began in the United States. Headline articles about flying saucers, flying discs. UFO wasn't a term that was used back then. With colleagues, we have now talked to well over a couple of hundred people connected with what happened there. Apparently a saucer crashed. Bodies were found, actually 2 saucers and 2 sets of bodies, 75 miles northwest of Roswell out in the boonies, and almost 200 miles west of there, also out in the boonies. New Mexico was a hotbed of classified military activity, of course, rocket firings, atom bomb tests, a whole bunch of stuff going on, secret cities like Los Alamos. But whatever the reason, we've been doing a lot of investigating for more than a decade. It's unquestionable that saucers were recovered there, which means that responsible people in the government have known since then. And obviously they couldn't go public with saying, oh yeah, we thought you'd like to know the Cold War has just begun, but there are aliens flying over the country. We can't do anything about them. We know what they want, where they come from. They couldn't have said that, not in the world circumstances.
Phil, how unquestionable is this evidence?
In 40-odd years of collecting UFO tales and reports, there is not, to my knowledge, a single physical artifact that Stan or anyone else can come up with even video pictures, that they can hand to the National Academy of Sciences and say, we rest our case on this evidence.
Evidence is more than physical evidence, though, right?
I repeat my
We'll get
statement.
into that
Yes.
in a moment. What's the most compelling UFO story that you've heard? You're a skeptic, of course.
Yes,
You don't
indeed.
believe that there is
Yeah,
evidence,
yeah.
but you'd like to. I mean,
Oh,
I'm sure you'd
indeed.
love to have a UFO
Everyone
land
would
in your
love. I'd love to
backyard.
have one land in my backyard. I'd love to be the first journalist to report, I touched one, I saw it, here is a photograph. But in 25 years of investigating UFO cases, all I come up with are old wives' tales, similar to the ghost stories. 200 years ago, women in Europe
He
claimed they were
knows that
abducted.
isn't true.
Two saucers land in New Mexico. They got
Crashed
bodies.
in New Mexico,
Where
but-
are those bodies?
All right.
We don't know. Some of them went to right field where they went. What we're dealing with here, you have to understand that we're not dealing with an open world in which, you know, I go to the government and say, hey, fellas, give me all the data on Roswell. We're dealing with a cosmic Watergate. That's not just a clever phrase. We're dealing with all
It is
kinds
a
of
clever
indicators.
phrase, too, though. We'll give you credit for that.
Okay, thanks. When we go after data, people think freedom of information is a magic key, opens up all the doors. It took me 5 years to get this released UFO document from the CIA. You can read 8 words on the document.
Yeah.
It took 5 years to get that after
Date
an
and
appeal.
location, I think, are the two
Yeah,
words.
even the
we've got here.
security
This is-
market.
This is what you get when you go after the government for a secret
Now,
document.
this is from the NSA. They're
Looks
the big
remarkably
boys
like
on the
this
block.
one, yeah.
Now, the important point here is that we're dealing with an annual black budget, not under congressional control, of the Pentagon, of over $34 billion a year, according to a Pulitzer Prize-winning reporter for the Philadelphia Inquirer, not the National Enquirer, Philadelphia Inquirer.
Important distinction.
So,
yeah.
yeah, the NSA spends $10 billion plus a year. Half the people in my American lecture audiences have never heard of the National Security Agency. If you can hide $34 billion a year, you can certainly hide a few bodies, a few pieces of saucers. You can hide a lot more.
Okay,
than
let me
that.
stop you there because we can't hide a commercial. When we come back, Buzz Aldrin, an astronaut who went to the moon, and also the Frenchman who inspired Close Encounters of the Third Kind. When we come back.
I think there's a meteor pack bearing down on us.
Secure for meteor interference, right now.
In 1969, astronaut Buzz Aldrin walked on the moon, so he's seen a thing or two in his time. And Jacques Vallee is an astrophysicist and author. He's the source of the character played by Francois Truffaut in Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Thank you for coming on the show. Appreciate it very much. Now, Buzz, you've never actually claimed to have seen a UFO per se, but you did see something rather odd, I think, on the Apollo 11 mission, was it?
Yes.
Yeah. What did you see?
It looked like a light that was moving against the background of the stars. And having obtained my Doctor of Science degree in orbital mechanics, I know that that's not a star because it's moving relative to it, and it's got motion. We had just shortly before separated from the third stage of the Saturn rocket to turn around and dock with the landing craft, and we're now connected with the landing craft and several hours further on toward the moon, the first day after having left Earth. And in order to dock with the lunar module, 4 very large panels come off. And they're not tracked at all, but they go off in different directions. The upper stage of the rocket is tracked by the Manned Spaceflight Network, so they know exactly where that is. Well, I looked at this and called it to the attention of Neil and Mike, and
Fellow astronauts.
right,
Mike?
along on the flight. And we took a look at it.
That
and
clear.
couldn't figure out what it was, but thought, well, gee, maybe that could be the S-4B. That's our third stage rocket. So we were aware enough of the public concern about unusual sightings, and you don't have to go to MIT to know that. It was not a smart thing to say to the ground, hey, Houston, Apollo 11 here, we got some light coming along with us, you know?
We got a UFO up here.
Right. We knew that that wasn't a good thing to say.
Scratch the
We
mission
asked
right
them where
there, wouldn't they?
We asked them where the S-4B was, and they said, wait just a minute, we'll check with the back room. Well, in a couple of minutes, they came up and said it was some 6,000 miles away, and we figured that was probably not what we were looking at.
Any idea what it was? Any speculation?
Yeah, it was one of the 4 panels.
Uh-huh.
If it was not the S4B.
Had to be one
But
of those 4.
Reflecting sunlight.
Reflecting in sunlight, yeah. We could look at it with the sextant and focus it brightly and see an L shape.
Yeah.
And when you change the focus, it became a series of spirals, indicating to me that it was out of focus.
Just quickly, yes or no, do you believe in extraterrestrial life conceptually? In the probability or at least possibility?
There are 24 of us that left the Earth and came back.
Well, you know what
There
I
are
mean.
12 of us that walked on the moon.
But how about things with, you know, like green and...
Somebody who originated someplace else.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you. Just...
Why not?
Well, okay, why not? That's a good enough answer. All right.
But we don't know.
No, I didn't mean to put you in a spot there. I was just... Conceptually, you agree there could be. How about you? Do you think that we got a shot at this?
Well, I think most astronomers would agree today that there is a high probability that life exists throughout the universe. I grew up in France wanting to be an astronomer, and I thought there couldn't be UFOs because if there were UFOs, astronomers would see them and astronomers would tell us. And then my first job was at Paris Observatory, tracking satellites and objects like these. And we started tracking things that should not have been there, that we could not identify with the instruments that we had and the computers that we had. And the man in charge of the project confiscated the tape and erased it. And that's really what got me started, because that is not the way science works. You know, in science, you don't destroy data.
Now, do I have this correct that you think that UFO sightings are a social phenomenon? That's
Among
how you
other
describe
things,
it?
I think there is a strong social component, because a lot of people want to believe it would be nice if there were aliens out there who came here to solve our problems. That would be nice. That's not necessarily what UFOs are. I'm convinced that there is a real physical UFO phenomenon. And I think that I could not prove it to the National Academy of Sciences, Phil, but I believe that it's a manifestation of a form of consciousness that's not human consciousness. That does not mean necessarily that we're being visited by anything green from another planet. There could be other possibilities.
Great.
It's an opportunity to do some good science. That's what science is all about.
Okay, and that's what this issue is really about, is about science and scientific proof. Next, wait a minute.
Not entirely.
Next, we'll meet a true believer in UFOs when we come back.
It's in the sky.
We saw flying objects containing maybe other people or another life form.
No, I think I saw a UFO.
We saw people, or whatever you want to call them.
Joining us now is Bill Maxwell, the publisher of the Journal of UFO Facts. Bill has never seen a UFO, nor been contacted by aliens or extraterrestrials, but he passionately believes they exist. Why is that?
Well, there's too many thousands of people who claim to have seen UFOs. Physical traces, like Stanton mentioned, movie film, and there are metal samples. And it's been going on since recorded history.
Yeah.
So these things all lead me to believe that we are being contacted on a day-to-day basis by extraterrestrial civilizations, not from this planet.
With all due respect, lots of people have seen the Loch Ness Monster, lots of people have seen Bigfoot, lots of people have seen Christ in a spaghetti billboard advertisement. That doesn't mean that, in fact, they exist.
No, it doesn't mean that they exist, but when you do have a physical craft that you can take a picture of, and you can also see
physical, wait a minute, is that a picture of a physical craft that we've taken?
Yeah, you can, sure.
Yeah, okay. Well, that could be a pie tin, though.
Sure, it could be, but some of the photographs that we do have analyzed have been analyzed by JPL, and these, and they substantiate that there is a craft that size, that far away from a camera, and that high in the sky. So it'd be hard pressed to put a 25-foot, you know, diameter craft, hubcap in the sky and take a picture of it.
I know some like MIT students who could probably manage that, though.
Who at JPL certified these photos?
Who at JPL certified those? Is that the question?
Yes, and which photos?
Could you
give us a name?
Sure. Should I
get
get
the
a
feeling
book
Phil's
out?
done this
I can
before?
get it out of the book if you like. Yeah.
Are you
Well,
talking
not
about
right
the
now,
Meyer
except that important.
photograph?
Yeah, some of them are for
People talk about government cover-ups all the time, and it's pretty easy to, you know, the CIA is behind everything, and we know that now. Phil, government, how credible is the idea of a government
Well, as a matter of fact, here is hard physical evidence that Stanton Friedman is aware of because it was published in the MUFON UFO Journal. What this is a top-secret assessment written by the top Air Force Navy intelligence officials December 10th, 1948. A year and a half
Read
after
the title, Phil.
A year and a half after these alleged crash saucers.
What is the title of it?
All right, the title of it is Analysis of Flying Object Incidents in the U.S.
And their conclusions are?
And their conclusions are that probably, if these are hard vehicles, actual vehicles, that these are probably spy vehicles developed by German scientists captured by the Soviets. So
this was published in 1948, by the way, after the Roswell, New Mexico.
Yeah,
incident.
a very limited focus document that doesn't recognize that we're dealing with compartmentalized information and that their whole focus, that is, the way security works is you don't tell everybody and then hope everybody shuts up. You tell very few people. You need special access, if you will, a need to know for that particular information. Because you have a top secret clearance does not give you access to all top secret information. The focus of this report is on the Russian side. That doesn't mean that there weren't other reports.
It's an analysis of what are UFOs. They say we're getting all these reports, we don't know what they are, and so we think
that's an analysis from 1947.
Right after
48. Right. So what's happening between 1947 and now?
But the point is that if there were crashed UFOs at Roswell, somebody forgot to tell the top Air Force and Navy intelligence.
But now, if there was a government conspiracy, wouldn't they publish something like this to cover up the facts?
To withhold the facts from the President of the United States, to withhold the facts from the Defense Department, the people who might have to defend the country if there were...
But couldn't this be misinformation?
That document doesn't mean that they withheld the information from those people. It's a specific study. The CIA has admitted that on occasion there were 3 different groups working independently, looking at the same problem, with no access across between the groups. So this is one study. It certainly doesn't mean that there wasn't a Roswell, and it isn't a top secret plus, which is what you need.
This is an example of the dilemma of denying a cover-up, okay? The government is trying to come forth with evidence denying a cover-up, and what do the other people say? Oh, well, that's all wrong. So whatever you come up with to deny that you're covering up something, somebody's always got another answer.
Well, let me
can you imagine how many people would have been aware of some of these things and could have made fortunes by denying this hard evidence that is supposed to be there?
Not if they didn't. They couldn't make the fortune if they didn't have a piece themselves.
Let me put it to you this way. It is not up to Phil to prove that UFOs don't exist. It's up to you and everybody else to prove that, in fact, they do exist.
Beyond a reasonable doubt.
We can't do anything right now because we have to go to a commercial. We'll be right back after this.
The film, he said, this is and we actually have this picture of the UFO here, and he got off the Jeep, went to the aircraft, handed the film to the pilot, the canopy closed, and the aircraft took off.
The reason for them not talking is usually that they've been threatened, or they fall under the regulation JNAP 146, which talks about if anybody talks about UFO events that have been reported in the military, they're subject to fine, loss of pension and retirement and every other thing, and even jail time.
We are back exploring the outer limits with our guests, Philip Klass, Jacques Vallee, Bill Maxwell, Buzz Aldrin, and Stanton Friedman. Jacques, what do you think? Government cover-up, CIA plot?
I think the big secret in Washington may be that the government has no idea what those things are. There is a lot of data. The government has a lot of data. That does not mean that they have information. I think it's a crime that that data is not released to the scientific community. I think that you would have a much higher level of debate. If that
Why wouldn't they release it?
Actually, the Colonel Bob Dean, who is a 27-year veteran of the Army, worked on SHAPE, NATO, command post. He came across a study that was done in 1961 called The Assessment. And it was released to 18 different NATO members at the time. And the assessment concluded that there were, at that time, 4 extraterrestrial civilizations visiting our Earth. At that time, in 1964. When he retired in 1976, his friends in the NSA and the CIA concluded that there were over 100 extraterrestrial civilizations visiting our Earth on a continuing basis.
The NSA believes that there are 100... Are you an ET? Phil's asking if you were in...
No, I'm a UFO, unforgettable object.
Until we get the documents from the government,
the fan club back there.
Until we can get the actual documents from the government, I mean, when the NSA admits it's withholding 156 UFO documents, that's from one limited search, and won't even show them to a federal court judge.
What's the purpose of doing that?
Well, I don't speak for the government. Let me give you 4 reasons for the governments not to, all governments, it's not just the U.S., not to want to release data. First, they want to figure out how the darn things work to make wonderful weapons delivery and defense systems.
Haven't been able to figure out in 43 years.
Set up, it might take 300 years. If you gave Columbus a nuclear submarine, he couldn't build 20 of them, even if he had an unlimited budget. You want to figure out how they work, you set up your secret project. Rule number 1 is you can't tell your friends without telling your enemies. They watch television, too. The second problem is the other side of the same coin. What if somebody else figures out how they work before you do? How do you defend against them? They make wonderful systems for attacking. You don't want them to know you know they know. And the third problem is the biggie. Suppose there were to be an announcement by highly trusted individuals around the world saying that indeed some UFOs are alien spacecraft. What would happen? You can imagine the stock market would go down, mental hospital admissions, church attendance would go up, I suppose. But the big thing that would happen would be an immediate push on the part of the younger generation, which was not alive when there wasn't a space program, unlike some of us older people, for a whole new view of ourselves, instead of as Americans, Russians, Chinese, Peruvians, whatever, as Earthlings, because obviously from an alien viewpoint, we are all Earthlings. There's no government on this planet that I'm aware of that wants its citizens to owe their allegiance to the planet instead of that individual government. Nationalism's the only game in town.
Actually, the question that you did pose, that why wouldn't the government release this information, there's many, many reasons. Economics is one, the power structure, the control structure of our planet.
Okay, whether or not the government releases anything, though, what I want to know is if there's 100 civilizations out there, if there are 4 civilizations out there visiting, if there's one, why don't they just show up, shake hands on the White House lawn?
I can tell you exactly why they won't. Because every time they do try to come by or fly by, what does our government do and the rest of the governments of the world? We send up fighter planes, we try to shoot them down.
Not true.
Not necessarily. Airline pilots have seen these things.
Ron, do you talk to the squirrels when you walk through the woods?
Well, sometimes, but that's my business.
They know that we know they're here. After you've been tracked on radar enough times, and I've talked to 100 military guys with great stories to tell, then you know the guy down there knows that you're here. So obviously their purpose is not to land on the White House lawn. And the President of the United States doesn't speak for 5 billion Earthlings.
Well, or the Kremlin, courtyard or whatever.
But you're suggesting that they're here to say, hi, fellas, what can we do for you?
Well, they are, in fact. They know we know they're here, so why don't they resolve this mystery?
Maybe they're graduate students doing their thesis work on the development of a primitive society.
Are we in fact, Phil, some experiment, or Jacques, somebody's thesis experiment?
We're already jumping to the conclusion that if there are UFOs, they have to be from outer space. Why? I mean, where is the connection?
I'm not jumping to that conclusion at all. If you look at manufacturing,
another country's military development,
there may be other forms of consciousness that we have not been aware of.
Explain what you're talking about here.
I spend a lot of time talking to witnesses, and I try to listen carefully to what they say. What they describe are not spacecraft. They describe extraordinary extraordinary forms of energy that seem to appear out of nowhere, disappear into nowhere, can change shapes dynamically, and yet are physical. To me, that's very exciting. It's an opportunity to test some of the more advanced theories in physics today. I think this is something that should be addressed by physics. It's clearly beyond the capability of today's technology.
Right. What does that suggest to you? That things appear, they disappear, parallel universes?
I think that's what science is all about. I don't understand why Phil is so upset about having one more mystery. I mean, we don't understand the sun. We don't understand the immune system. There are all kinds of things.
Phil, you're not upset at the mystery. You're upset at people saying we've solved the mystery and this is what it is.
Well, saying that some UFOs...
Wait a minute, let Phil have a chance. Poor Phil's down there in the end all alone. And it's
Poor guy.
We fortunately live in a free country. Every one of us can believe what we wish or what we don't wish. I'm only here to try to present the other, the skeptical viewpoint, a viewpoint which I think is predominant in our National Academy of Science. I'm not a spokesman for them. But organized science, the physical... May I speak without interruption for just a moment?
Now, come and smack you, Bill.
Okay, okay.
The National Academy of Sciences, the Physical Society of Physicists, the Institute of Electrical and Electronic Engineers, of which I am a fellow, none of these groups taken any official scientific interest in UFO reports.
I disagree.
Maybe because these kinds of promoters spout such scientific pseudo-science.
Okay,
Look,
Bill, now you're free to
hey, I'm the physicist here who's just been attacked by you.
Bill's been so anxious, though. I want to let him have
I
a
would
shot.
say I'm not a promoter. The conclusions that our magazine comes to is that there are many extra terrestrials who are visiting our planet. They may travel interdimensionally. They may travel through time. They may travel physically. And we have many 3,000 photographs. If there's a single photograph that is true, doesn't that mean that a lot of extraterrestrial races may come here? Some 10 billion...
Can't jump to that conclusion. I won't.
Some 10 billion stars...
You're not ready to...
10 billion stars in our galaxy. So that's a lot of stars.
One of the studies of photographs that Bill mentions come from one man, Billy Meyer, in Switzerland. I've gone to the place in Switzerland where he lives. That man is not a poor farmer who happens to be seeing flying saucers. He has an entire cult around him. The negatives have never been available to scientists, and I think that is not the way we can solve the problem.
Okay.
And I would agree with that.
There's another problem we can't solve. We'll be right back after these words from our sponsor.
A red or reddish-orange color, but it had other colors moving around in it.
We saw flying objects containing maybe other people or another life form.
We're back. The subject is UFOs. Buzz, now you would like to see NASA get more money and space exploration really take off. Is one way to do that to encourage people's belief in extraterrestrials? Give us something, a carrot out there dangled in space for us to go after?
Well, I think there's a legitimate reason for a search for extraterrestrial intelligence, the way that NASA's defined it, and to search the skies for evidence of intelligent signals coming through electromagnetic radiation or anything else that's detectable to our sensors.
That's good science.
And that's what we're trying to do, and that's what you could do very well on the far side of the moon where it's nice and quiet and we don't hear the noise that's created that emanates out from here.
Okay. Yes,
I think Mr. Vallee has the right idea in that we should all be open-minded. I mean, that's what science is all about, hypothesizing and then finding the experiments and making the conclusions. But I do think the supporters of the aliens are being a bit way off base here. I would like to know if you have any real evidence that you can share with us.
Yes, I do. I have evidence that I can share with you in our journal. We publish it 4 times a year. It does have physical evidence, has photographs. There are sound recordings that have come to light. We just had the case come to light with a...
Is there any case that is international almost, well-known, really?
Loads of cases from all over the world. The problem is most people aren't aware of the data. Look, there are 5 large-scale scientific studies. The biggest one done for the United States Air Force covered 3,201 sightings. So over 600 of these couldn't be explained, separate from the ones for which there was insufficient information. Quality evaluation shows the better the quality, the more likely to be an unknown. That's one major study. It isn't mentioned in 10 skeptical books about UFOs. Don't bother us with the facts. Our minds are made up. That's the attitude of the debunker. And what the public doesn't know, we're not going to tell them. That's the second rule for the debunker. There have been 8 PhD theses done about UFOs, some of them having lots of good information. The problem is you won't get it on the 6 o'clock news. The problem is that many scientific journals won't publish UFO information. That doesn't mean most scientists don't believe in UFOs. There have been polls done that show not only that most general public people believe in UFOs, but the greater the education, the more likely to believe in UFOs.
Pardon me,
they want to believe in them.
No, it isn't that they want to believe in them. Most people are scared of the unknown. They'd just assume that these things weren't real because
we
it's
want
another
to believe. We want
That's
to believe,
a small
Stan.
minority, just like
I want to believe. I'm skeptical, but I
5%
want
of the people don't believe
too.
we've been to the moon. You realize that?
Fine. I don't need to argue with them.
There are crazy views out there. A small percentage may want to believe. Just as, and I agree with you, I don't try to argue with them either, or with the ones who say the moon landing was all staged by television out in the desert.
Well, let's take a little poll here. How many people here in the audience would really want to believe if they thought there was evidence to suggest it? How many people? Raise your hand, clap, do whatever. A lot of people want to.
If there's evidence.
Even Phil wants to believe.
If there's evidence.
No, he doesn't.
I think
Sure he does.
If he
read his books, he does not want to.
If he truly investigated like he proposes to, he would find more evidence than he could ever imagine.
All right, we got a question here.
Yeah, I have an input and question for Stan. I met a four-star general, Chief of Staff of the Air Force, Curtis LeMay, in 1987, and what he told me is that the CIA was withholding information from him about where the flying saucers were coming from. He told me that personally.
Had you had a few drinks with him before?
No,
Just
absolutely
checking.
not.
Okay.
Absolutely not.
Had to ask.
I have a question for Stan regarding President Reagan making 5 statements about the alien presence.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, on 5 different occasions, President Reagan did say that if there were alien visitors, we and the Russians would work together. He also has publicly stated that he's had a sighting of a UFO, Ron. I don't know whether he talked to you about that.
No, he didn't, and I've heard that too, but I don't buy that. Was that the National Enquirer or something?
It's been in other papers.
Yeah, well,
and
it
this
might have been
pilot
picked
has
up. Was it
convinced-
originally in the Enquirer?
I've heard about it elsewhere.
Was it originally in the Enquirer?
One of these articles was.
I think was.
Now, Ron, wait just
he
a
never
minute,
told
Ron.
me. It's a major government cover-up because he never told me.
Have you asked him?
Yeah, absolutely. He would have. I swear to you, he would have said something if he really.
This is when he was governor, not when
I'd
he
have
was
been like
president.
first on his list to call.
Which list, Ron?
Okay, if there's so much evidence and, you know, identification of these things, why is it, I have 2 questions for you. Why is it still unidentified flying object? And second question, why is there a super paranoid attitude about the government trying to cover up all this? Why should they?
Now, wait, you're asking...
Wild conspiracy theory, Jacques?
We keep using loose terms like belief and evidence. Science is not about belief.
Right.
And evidence is not something we have. We have a lot of very interesting anecdotal information. The science has never been done. There are a few individual scientists who have spent their spare time and their own money trying to, like myself, trying to investigate those cases all over the world. I think we have a good case that something should be pursued, but we have not done the science. Until the science is done, we're not going to have the answer.
Okay, hang on a sec, because we got to go to a commercial. We'll be right back, though.
Someone, something here, knows the answer.
I may have the answer. Let's have a look.
We're back talking about UFOs. Buzz, give us a little inside dope, a little locker room chatter. The astronauts, you guys ever kick around the idea of UFOs, extraterrestrials?
Well, I just came from 2.5 days with Neil Armstrong. We were talking about what we did on the lunar surface, and people were helping us document the exact facts. And, you know, any of us could be rather wealthy if we just disclosed all of a sudden that we saw UFOs. But we don't do that because we're credible people. If you want funds to support something, you go to the Congress, and the Congress is going to respond to the people, and I'm trying to get back to the moon and on to Mars, and that's what I think we need the finances to do, rather than to support a lot of these bizarre studies.
Yes, Jacques. A smattering of applause.
Gordon Cooper, who is someone I think we both respect, told me that he had seen something that he could not identify, not from orbit, but from the ground when he was a test pilot.
Well, I just told you that I saw something that I couldn't identify.
But you just identified it.
No, I didn't.
But there's,
It's still
it doesn't matter in a specific case. There's thousands of reports.
Sure.
If one single report is true, then the UFO mystery is not a mystery anymore, that we are being visited by extraterrestrials.
But so far it hasn't proven to anybody's
If one,
satisfaction.
but not one
At
has
least
been
not to
established.
mine.
Science wants repeatable experiments.
Well, there is a repeatable. How could you repeat? Oh, I want you to land here again, so the government can shoot SAM missiles at you. And
Science is also ready to respond to stimuli. When I was at the University of Chicago, they had a balloon ready to launch with a box of emulsion to record particles from the sun when a detector said there'd been a solar storm. They couldn't reproduce it. They couldn't duplicate it. They were ready to observe it when it showed up. We have lots of sightings from all over the world. People like you and I have had some grants, fortunately, are able to go out and check on those cases. The money is piddling compared to what is used in big research and development programs. I've worked on a number of them. But there is evidence, not in terms of a prominent person saying, I saw it, but I don't have the report. What good would that do?
Well, the answer may come, Ron, in the tens of millions of low-cost video cams that tens of millions of Americans now have. Because still photos of UFOs are terribly easy to hoax, as his magazine demonstrates.
I disagree.
But video is much more difficult, not impossible, much more difficult to hoax.
There are
with
good
tens
videos
of millions
now.
of video cams, in another year or so, you may have loads of film showing E.T. craft,
Let me get
and I will
He's never
publicly
seen,
admit I'm wrong.
He's never seen my magazine before
I know
today.
you disagree
Never.
with him, Bill. I know.
Hi.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, I don't have a question, but I have a comment. Is that allowed?
A brief one. Yeah.
All right. For personal reasons and for the spontaneous reasons of the emotions I'm feeling right now, watching all of you and listening, I had to stand up and comment. I'm watching 5 men, older than me, one younger than me, probably, sitting here bandying about an issue of tremendous magnitude with a recipe of old ideas. All of you got here in limousines, 250-year, or cars, or bus. 300 years ago, it would have been on horseback. If somewhere along the line, somebody had not opened their minds to a new idea, new evolution and the changes in so much of what we all enjoy today wouldn't be existing. There's a flaw. I find humankind more phenomenal than the phenomenon of extraterrestrials.
The SETI program has been looking along the radio bands for evidence of technological civilizations out there for some time now, and they came up with a big goose egg, Zippo.
It's
nothing.
a seriously flawed program, Ron, that doesn't really involve science so much as what I would call cultism. Charismatic leadership, a narrow view. We assume there's life out there. We assume they're trying to communicate with radio. We assume that our systems can pick them up. If they're using lasers, we won't be able to pick them up at all. Those guys are totally unwilling to look at the UFO evidence.
Well, they're focusing in one particular direction.
Well, but if you're
my
interested
question, why does an advanced technology doesn't give some evidence of radio technology and radio waves going out into space?
Because they're much more advanced than the radio. If they have, well, we're a little ant race on a small planet on the edge of the Milky Way.
Looking for smoke signals 100 years ago would have been one way to check on long-distance communication.
Yeah.
But it certainly isn't the most
If they're
advanced
that
technique
advanced, though,
around.
there's something kind of pedestrian about the whole idea of flying saucers and little green men. Then. Wouldn't they be more advanced than that?
That's true, because some of them do travel interdimensionally.
Is that, Jacques, is that are we getting into your country now, interdimensional travel?
Well, I think that was 20 years ago. You know, that was a very marginal idea in science. Today, it's not such a marginal idea in science. If you look at the Sky and Telescope magazine, a year and a half ago, published an article about the creation of universes with multiple dimensions moving at right angle to each other. That's a very interesting idea. It's a theory, and perhaps the UFO phenomenon is giving us the opportunity to test some of those advanced theories in physics. I think that's why we should look at it.
Okay. Yes, sir.
Okay, I've got a comment about what I've been hearing about these cover-ups and the SETI program. If we have a government that has military regulations that prevents pilots from revealing that they've seen a UFO before they've been debriefed or at all, if we have astronauts who are told to shut up about what they see, some of them, and if we have a National Academy of Sciences who is funded by the government and works as part of the government, why would we assume that any of these are going to tell us what they find instead of just wrapping it up and hiding it? Why should we assume that they're going to tell us?
They won't.
Well, we assume that they don't.
As a matter of fact, we have very advanced technology for building stealth aircraft. We can try and have kept that secret from potential enemies. But anything that is as universal as ETs visiting Earth, it would be ridiculous to try to keep it secret. If there were a secret crash saucer recovered from New Mexico, why keep it secret and have one land or crash in Moscow or Paris
Maybe
or
one has,
London
Phil.
and let them beat us to the punch by saying, hey, the first ET craft chose Mother Russia to land
They can't,
rather than...
They want to use the technology first. That's what matters here is technology. You know that. You covered the technology beat for 40 years.
Let's take another question.
Phil Klass, your time has come to an end. Why don't you retire and go fishing? We're in a new area. The UFOs are here, and they're going to stay here. They're not going away. Go fishing.
That's right. Do UFOs go fishing? Do they like to fish?
Fishing for UFOs.
I'm not a fisherman. I try to go sailing and downhill skiing with my wife as much as my aviation week.
One thing he doesn't do, Ron, we talked about the crash saucer. My colleagues and I have talked to well over 200 witnesses involved in that case and been down in New Mexico many times. Phil has talked to none of those witnesses.
Wrong.
You have? You hadn't as of 2 weeks ago.
All right.
3 weeks ago, whatever
I
the
had
time.
communicated with one long ago, but there were 3 people who allegedly were first-hand witnesses. Mac Brazel, the rancher who found the debris, Major Jesse Marcel, who went out to his ranch, and a man named Sheridan Cavett. There are 2 of those 3, Marcel and Brazel, are dead. Cavett is still living. Have you talked to Cavett?
Yes.
What did he say? Did he?
And I've talked to, been in Marcel's house, and I've talked to
Cavett is living today.
Yeah, he was a counterintelligence corps guy.
Obscure here.
He denies.
He has done no investigation of the case. That's what it boils
right,
down
well, he
to.
disagrees.
Denies
Hang on a sec.
the crash saucer.
We're
case.
running out of time here. We've resolved this whole question of UFOs.
Right. Naturally.
And we'll be back right after this. Not sure yet about UFOs? Well, join us tomorrow for part 2 on the subject. Meet some people who claim to have extended contact with individuals from outer space. Before we go, let me thank my guests, Philip Klass, Jacques Vallee, Bill Maxwell, Buzz Aldrin, Stanton Friedman. Until then, live long and prosper.